Welcome to I'm Spiritual But, starring the award-winning author and actress Anne Scottlin and globally renowned speaker and award-winning author Dr. Roger Leslie. I'm Spiritual But is a one-of-a-kind talk show about inclusive spirituality for religious and non-religious people alike. It's our vision to inspire everyone to discover their own unique spiritual experience. Email us at hello@imspiritualbut.com. We'd love to hear from you, or if you have a guest to recommend for the show. Thank you to USA Global TV, to our sponsors, and to all of you for spreading the word. And now, Anne Scottlin and Dr. Roger Leslie.
Welcome back to I'm Spiritual But, and thank you all for joining us today. We are in the house, our guest is here, and we have everything up and running 100%, so we're excited. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning, Anna. How are you?
I am good. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are. So, Roger, how has your week been, and have you had any special spiritual insights on your end?
Well, thanks for asking. First of all, it took me a little while to get down come down from the anxiety of all the technical things that happened last week. As our viewers can imagine, with 3 different things going wrong from 3 different places, we were scrambling backstage at the beginning to figure out how we're going to do this and what can we do. So I want to thank you and Jacqueline and Mike for being, having things under control and helping make the decision to just tell the viewers, we're going to hang this one up this week and move on to next week. So that's that one. For as far as the spiritual insight, the biggest message I keep getting is leave the world behind. As I do my spiritual practices, leave the world behind. And I take that to understand all the worldly things that I tell myself are so important, all the things that I keep trying to juggle and coordinate. Ultimately, what matters is how we've loved ourselves and how we've loved other people. And if we can leave all the other stuff behind, I think it all works itself out.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes. Leaving behind the pieces we don't need. And doesn't mean that we can't be in the world with everyone else. It just means basically not letting the less important things obsess us and stress us, right?
Yes. And how about you? Have you had any good spiritual messages this week?
I had a lot of challenges this week. I had a very traumatic experience, actually. I had my next door neighbor committed murder and attempted suicide.
Oh, my goodness.
So I've been through a lot. We had a lot of young adult children in our house, trying to help them. There's snow outside. It's cold. They didn't have anywhere else to go to kind of be a staging place for the emergency response. And it was a really trying experience. I have to say, that kind of thing really rattles you to the core. And what's really interesting is I'm really good in a crisis. Typically, I'm right there. I'm not nervous. I just handle it and flow. About 2 or 3 days later, when I come kind of down off of my mental adrenaline, then I get very despondent. It kind of really hits me. And I found a lot of refuge in my own spiritual practice, in my meditation, in being still and just getting back to the basics and knowing that we are all connected in love, and we can help when we can, but we don't have to obsess on the pain that isn't ours. Because as an empathic person, it's very easy to do that, to just take on the pain and the suffering of those around you. So while I was with them helping, that's great. After that, I can use my spiritual practices to give that up to divine, higher self, whatever you want to call it, and reclaim my peace. Doesn't mean you don't care. It means that I'm not in my best self to serve others if I am in a dark space. So that was my lesson for the week. It was a much bigger lesson than I would have ever have liked to learn, but that is what it was.
Yes. And I'd like to just remind our viewers that if they continue their spiritual practices regularly, it helps them get back to them when something that traumatic jars us. If you do them during good times and regular times consistently, then after you go through something, as you went through, Anne, and you try to get back into them, it falls back into place much more naturally. And it's a much easier journey than to not do any spiritual practices for a long time, go through something and think, oh my gosh, I better get back into it. If you do it consistently, it will help before and after those traumatic experiences.
It's so true. And then I'll get over to our guests in just a second. It's kind of like muscle memory for those of you who exercise or work out. If you used to have, if you work out on a regular basis and occasionally you lapse for a couple of weeks, you can get back in shape pretty quickly because your muscle has memory. But if you wait too long, it takes much longer. And I would say that was a huge benefit to me to have practices that are working for me now, which is a big part of this show. Like, what is working for you in a spiritual experience that is yours and yours alone, and knowing what to do and what I needed, and really being transported to a higher place and with more calm. So if I hadn't been practicing that regularly, because we lapse, we all do, it would have been much more challenging. So I really appreciate you sharing that. All right, everybody. Well, yes, and welcome back to our live show, as in we had the tech issues last week, and that's because we're live. We're here for you, and the reason we're live is because we want to hear from you. We would really like to have your comments, your questions. This show is for you. This is about you and for you, and this is having support, creating a global conversation around inclusive spirituality. Finding what's working for other people, not preaching any one particular solution, but finding a community of people who want to combine in heart and love and spirit to build us all up and build connections with what we have in common, as opposed to just what separates us. So, and to just restate the purpose of the show, it's really to reflect the light in each one of you so you can live your dream more fully and trust your own spiritual path more profoundly. And as always, I will say, please do like and subscribe. That's what enables us to keep this coming to you, and sending your questions and comments during the live show. We would really love to respond to you if at all possible. So I want to turn this over to Roger to introduce our special guest, who we're really excited about.
I am excited that Mike's going to be with us because he has so many profound things to share. So Mike ELLERKAMP is a husband, father, grandfather, and cancer survivor. In the 1970s, he served both in the U.S. Air Force and in the U.S. Army as an airborne ranger. I first got to know Mike several years ago when he used to lead the Houston chapter of the Nonfiction Authors Association, which is one of the largest organizations of its kind in the world. In 2017, Mike helped unite the world spiritually with his profound and empowering book, The Simple Little Rule, The Golden Rule Rediscovered. For it, he researched various religions and found a common thread. Every major religion has a core tenet that boils down to treating others as we ourselves want to be treated. Please, everyone, welcome our guest, Mike ELLERKAMP. Hi, Mike. So glad you're here with us.
We made it.
We are here live. Yes. And I hope
we made it.
And I hope you all will send in your comments and questions for Mike or us as well. So to just get us started, Mike, I was going to ask you, tell us just a little bit about your spiritual life story and how it's brought you to where you are today.
Okay, well, it's going to have to be the very abridged version because
Yeah,
it's
perfect.
Very long journey. All my life, I've had some spiritual urge, drive, I guess is a good word. And I went through different variations of the theme. I converted to Catholicism at an early age, was married later. While I was in Boulder, Colorado, at the church that I converted in, it was great. That church was very, I guess, libertarian in that sort of a sense. But my wife and I, at the time, went to another location following work back in the day. And it wasn't the same. And the church leadership there was completely different and locked into a very strict dogma, Catholic dogma, and don't ask questions, just follow the catechism, don't worry about it. And that didn't work for me, so moved on. Years later, I found actually between my Air Force and my Army, which is another very interesting story, but anyway, between my Air Force and Army, I discovered, a friend of mine introduced me to a Bible study group, and the pastor of that group, we were in Colorado at the time, Denver, Colorado. The pastor taught from the original Greek and Hebrew. So basically, word by word, we went through. He would pick a chapter, or we would do a book, and he would pick a chapter. He would start at verse 1, and we would work our way completely through the book from beginning to end. And I did pretty much every book in the Bible, at least once. So this went on for about 7 years, and at some point, at a meeting that after a church service, I was in conversation with a friend of mine, and the pastor was standing far enough away that I wasn't really part of the conversation, but I could hear what he was saying. And he made a comment about apartheid. He said, apartheid is the way it should be, or the solution to the matter, or something to that effect. And this is 1983-ish. And I'm like, I don't know what that, no Google, no way I didn't know what apartheid meant. I wasn't up on all the news. And when I finally found out what that was and figured it out, it made a gigantic impact in my life completely. It was like nuclear holocaust in my head. I couldn't understand how a person of spirit teaching spiritual truths could say such a thing once I realized what that meant. And so I left, and it resolved in many terrible things. A divorce came. My dad died shortly thereafter. A divorce happened. Anyway, so I went through a very, very dark period. And my way back happened to be that I found Joseph Campbell, so mythology. And I started reading Joseph Campbell, and the more I read his works, and I pretty much read just about everything he ever produced. I can't claim it all, but everything I could find and get my hands on, I've got, and I've read.
And just for our viewers, could you just tell them a little bit about, just briefly, who Joseph Campbell is?
Well, I would say, in my opinion, he was probably the premier mythology expert of his time. I mean, I think he passed away in maybe 90, very late 80s. He was still alive when I first discovered him. He did interviews on TV and so on. But anyway, I think he was considered probably the master of mythology.
And when you say mythology, can you expand on that? Because I know it might mean different things to different people.
Well, mythology, he defined it. The journey of the hero or something. Anyway, he basically defines it. One of his famous interviews, and I forget the guy's Maury, I forget. Anyway, doesn't matter. Was about Star Wars and how Star Wars fit perfectly into the hero mythology and how that worked and why that was important. And then that takes you to many, many stories in history are mythological stories of, honor winning out over, light over dark, good over evil, the hero, right? So
and if I might just add, and the hero's journey, which is what we talk about primarily on this show, about your own spiritual journey. We're all on a spiritual journey. The hero's journey is the core of that mythology. And
so Joseph Campbell basically is studying stories, mythologies, myths from everywhere. Okay. And so one of the things that really appealed to me or that got stuck with me was, for instance, every single culture on the planet has a flood story. Every one. Okay. Now they vary in their extent or how catastrophic they may have been, but they all have important flood stories. Okay, that's one of the myths. And so I began going, well, wait a second. So he introduced me to a series of videos that were done about the Polynesians, and the Polynesians basically they conquered the Pacific Ocean in canoes. Now, we all think canoes, we think of the little, 8 foot long, 5 people in a canoe. These things were ocean going. Cook and others who first discovered the Polynesian islands were absolutely amazed at their canoes, the way they were designed and the way that they could move from island to island with essentially no astronomical guidance. They use the stars, but not in the way that we do with levers and so on. They're just stars, waves, right? And the boats have to be designed. So you have two individuals that are very important to the culture. One is the navigator, and the other one is the person who builds the boat. The boats have to be designed so that they can go in either direction straight ahead. So no matter what's going on, and they're built with outriggers. So the boat has to be curved at exactly the right angle with the outrigger so that it will travel straight in the water. Otherwise, the outrigger will drag it left or right, depending on which direction the boat's going. So that and the navigator, who's got the waves and the way the ocean is moving and the colors and the smells, guided them from one island to the next. Okay, so that's important to me. That was like, okay, it's a form of religion. It's a way for them to do what they did. They were driven, for some reason, to travel across the ocean and find these little tiny specks in the middle of the ocean, which now takes me back to another thing that Campbell brings up, which these are all things that began kind of my hunt. So another thing that he brings up is, depending on who you listen to, who you read or watch, scientists basically say that we pop out at about 200,000 years ago, give or take. And generally, I know there's some new information that's coming up, and it's kind of some strange stuff I'll talk about in just a second. But generally, they say that we're leaving Africa at about 70,000 years ago. Okay. So, or I'm sorry, at about 60,000 years after. So at about 150,000 years ago, we're coming out of Africa. Okay. The humans, Homo sapiens. Okay. So in 150,000 plus or minus years, Homo sapiens make it out of the portal of Africa to our hemisphere, the Western hemisphere. So all of the North and South America, right, in less than 150,000 years. Okay. We're like on a train. You got a bunch of folks walking, stopping on occasion, and somehow we are driven to make it from Africa to the eastern borders of the United States in 70 or 80,000 years. It's pretty interesting. We're the only human on the planet, we're the only mammal on the planet, that inhabits the entire space from the furthest northern reaches to the southern reaches, east to west. We are the only creature that has ever accomplished that feat. And that includes all of the Pacific Islands. So that's kind of strange. That's kind of a weird deal. Anyway, those books got me into mythology. That gets me to Roman mythology. That gets me to Greek mythology. That gets me to all these other, right? And then I pop out of that and I start reading other forms of religions, because I still haven't lost my desire to find that spiritual truth. I'm using finger quotes here. To find that truth. What is it? Why do we keep searching for it? What drives us to do what we do? That's my question I keep asking myself. And every time I'm teased by these little things like Joseph Campbell led me to, it just makes me even more curious. How does that work? Why is that important? Why do we keep doing it? Why does it keep coming up? And so, quite by accident, I'm reading Confucius, I'm reading Buddha, I'm reading, I've studied Zarathustra, of course, the Jews. We've got both Jewish and Christian culture in the Christian faith. I've gone through the Quran. So essentially, I've covered just about every major religion that's out there. Interesting side point. All of the main philosopher teachers, Socrates, Buddha, Confucius, Christ, Muhammad, none of those people wrote their own material. The material that we find written for us to understand and study has been written by somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Socrates, you have Plato and Aristotle. Confucius is his students. Buddha, his students. Christ, students, and the different. Paul in particular was an important one. Zarathustra we're not sure about Zarathustra. He could have written his own material, but it appears not. But anyway, another interesting side point. All of these people, so in each case, and it actually was Confucius. I was reading Confucius and I see the golden rule. Only he used it backwards. He did the negative side of the golden rule. Do not do to others what you would not have them do to you. Okay, great. That's interesting. I go back and I grab my Bible out. That's what Christ said. Only he said it the other way. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Hillel the Elder said, do unto others as you would have them do to you. Aristotle and Plato, they phrased it all kinds of different ways. The Jewish philosophers during a period known as the Axial Age, which is 500 BC, give or take, they talked about the golden rule. So all over the planet, Confucius lived at about 500 BC. Confucius lived at about 500 BC. Socrates lived at about 500 BC. The three main Jewish teachers lived, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Isaiah lived at about 500 BC. Zarathustra is thought to have lived about 500 BC. So all of these people live in and around a time we now call the Axial Age, and they're all teaching the golden rule. And except for about 3 of them, they can't know each other.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
They cannot know each other. They don't have any clue, no knowledge of one another, and yet they're all teaching the same doctrine.
So why do you think that is?
Because it is a fundamental truth. It is a spiritual fundamental truth. It is consistent, it's neutral, it's transparent, and it's, what's the other one? Universal, neutral, I said neutral, consistent, neutral, universal, transparent. Those things make up truths, okay? Because as long as they stay consistent and they're neutral, right? So golden rule is perfect. There's no sex mentioned. There's no race mentioned. There's no wealth mentioned. It is just you individually are to take responsibility for yourself, love yourself so that you can love others. Now, Hillel the Elder went on to say, that is it. Now go and learn. Right? At some point, he was asked, and this is just about the time Christ was born, he's asked, and this story is funny and long, but this guy's going around trying to get the main teachers to tell him how to explain the Torah while standing on one foot. And he just gets sent away, go away. You're silly, stupid, go. He gets to Hillel the Elder, and he asks Hillel the Elder, and Hillel the Elder basically picks up a foot and says, love God with all your heart. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That is the truth. Now go and learn. And he's put his foot back down, that's the Torah. Now go and learn. So essentially, and then Christ, some 28 or 9 years later, says essentially the same thing. Do unto others as you would have them do. That is the doctrine. Now go and learn. So it's not, we tack on all these other things, but it's not that. It's about that we're supposed to take responsibility for ourselves, and we have to love ourselves so that we can love other people. And if we can do that, then now it's so simple that it's really hard.
Right? Of course. Like that is the thing. Like how do you apply it?
That's why we
Can you hold that up again? It's the simple little rule.
Yeah,
the simple little rule. Okay. And we're going to put in the notes also Mike's URL if you want to reach out. So I have to just take a quick moment here to remind you all to please send in your questions and comments. We're more than halfway done our show already. Send in your questions and comments. We would love to respond for any of us. And we will give you some more information at the end. So, Roger, what were you going to ask him?
Well, I was going to say, your eclectic approach to understanding spirituality and then you're arriving at a universal truth reminds me of the quotation that you provided for us, which we always do as part of our show. So I'd like to share that quotation with our audience now. In the world, there are many different roads, but the destination is the same. There are 100 deliberations, but the result is one. And that's from the I Ching.
Yeah, I had at one point I had probably 50 or 60 of those. There's Rumi wrote one about candles or lights. The light we can take the light from one place to another place. It's always the same light. It doesn't change. The light is the light.
So Mike, at this point in your spiritual journey, why did this quotation in particular touch you enough to want it for you to want this one to be the one we shared on the show?
Oh gosh, you would ask me that because I couldn't figure out I knew just enough about the program. I still was going spiritual, but I was like, but what? What's that supposed to mean? This one was important to me because it is what it is, right? There's just like the candles or the lights. There's 1,000 roads to the destination. You can take whatever road you want. You're responsible to try to take the road that's going to make you the best person or the happiest person. You need to try to figure out how that works. But guess what? There's a million different ways to get there. In my book, I talk about when we start talking about these sorts of problems, right? I talk about one where because I use a lot of analogies that have to do with the military. I was an instructor at Ranger School, and so I have a lot of these little quippy little stories. And one of those, and I'll make it very quick. We have one of the patrols in Florida Ranger Camp. You go down the river, you get out, you're in the swamp, and you have to move through the swamp about a mile or so up onto high ground to get to your objective to make your whatever that mission is for that evening. Okay. Well, these students have figured out they see pine trees or what they think is a pine tree out there somewhere. They know that pine tree means that's high ground. Okay. Now we have a compass and we have a map and we've got a mission plan, and the mission plan says take route X and keep moving because that's going to get you to your objective. The minute you look at that pine tree or think you've seen that pine tree over there somewhere, you've just lost the mission because you only have a certain amount of time to get from that boat to that objective point. And the minute you start wandering around in the swamp chasing after pine trees, it's done. The mission's over.
So, Mike, do you have any insights for our viewers on how best to stay the course? Once we know what we're looking for spiritually or what we hope to find, do you have any, with the work that you've done with people over the years, do you have any insights for our viewers on how not to be distracted by what we think are the pine trees?
Can I read a quote?
Sure.
Okay. Because it's basically this may have been the one I would have chosen. There's so many. I have so many that I could have chosen a dozen and they would all worked. Okay, so this is from Sigmund Freud, and any religious folks out there are going to go, "Oh my God!" But here we are. Okay, this was one I discovered through Joseph Campbell. Okay, because Joseph Campbell got me thinking about early psychology. So Sigmund Freud and others. So this is an interesting one out of some of his material that I read early 40 years ago. Okay, here's the quote. The truths contained in religious doctrines are, after all, so distorted and systematically disguised that the mass of humanity cannot recognize them as truth. Okay, so the truths have been so systematically disguised and distorted that the mass of humanity can no longer discover them as truth. So here is what helped me get there. What helped me get there was through my research, because my research, fortunately for me, I'm ADD, right? I'm the guy chasing the little red dot. So wherever the little red dot went, I chased it. So I have studied. I spent 3 years trying to figure out about consciousness, because that was important to me. I had to understand why I thought there was a universal consciousness. I tell a story in the book, and it has to do with this. It has to go back to our deal with these different teachers all over the place, and they're all teaching the same thing. Well, how can that be? There's got to be something that's helping us understand that. So, is it an evolutionary thing, or is it something else? Well, I've come to understand that it's something else. I call it the universal consciousness. It can be the spirit. It can be whatever. So here's another little quote. Teilhard de Chardin said, we are not physical bodies looking for a spiritual existence. We are spiritual bodies looking for a physical existence. And there we are. We are spiritual bodies in a physical realm, in a physical body, looking for a physical existence. We can't do that as a spirit. Doesn't work. We got to have the body to have a physical experience. The spirit has none of that. It is immutable. If you want to go to God, the things that we talk about God, omnipresent, omniscient, immutable, and what's the other one? Omnipresent, omniscient, omnipresent, and immutable, right? So it is at all times, everywhere, at doing all things. Time is not an issue. It is in the moment of every moment. We can't understand that. It's beyond our comprehension. However, this is the reason why it has no time. It is just an existence. It's a spirit. And so it is experiencing the physical realm through us. And that's where all of the old texts talk about sin nature. Humans evolved to a point of consciousness. There's two kinds of consciousness, right? Dr. Roger Leslie, there's two kinds of consciousness, right? There's the consciousness spelled CONSCIOUS, which is just awareness. Animals are aware. All animals are aware. They're all conscious. But then there's another kind, conscience, conscious, right? And what is that? That's that little guy or guys. If you go one way, you've got both of them, good and bad guy, right? If some of us, I'm one of those, it's the good guy trying to tell the sin nature, the bad guy, the physical self, who's got all this ego stuff going on. Hey, settle down, back up, do what you're supposed to do. Let's have fun, right? I'm here to enjoy life. Let's go, body. And there we are. So for me, I had to figure out what that meant for me. What was that? And once I figured that out, I live constantly. And thankfully, I'm a Gemini, so it's easy. I talk to myself all the time. So me and myself have all these conversations, and I play with myself and others,
Right.
right. But it's,
I love what you're saying there, Mike, because in Roger's book as well, he talks so much about. I love his method where he uses the capital and the small case for self, small s,
yes,
self, capital S,
yes,
me, small, me, capital me, and that concept is very freeing because, in one sense, we have a gift that the part of us that is in a physical body gets to experience the tangible, which, spirit, you may not, we don't know for sure, but most likely not. So both of you, both self and self, or higher consciousness, whatever you want to call that, is working towards one end. So,
hopefully.
okay. So yeah, go
Hopefully.
on. Tell us a little more about that.
Well, because okay, so let's go back to the golden rule. Okay, let's go back to the golden rule for a second, because golden rule is super, super, super important. It's the law of reciprocity. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, and in the spiritual realm, we don't know what that means exactly, right? But just imagine, if you will, take a pebble. You got a little pond here in front of us, and it's perfectly calm. If you drop the pebble in the pond, it makes a ripple. The ripple goes out, and everything it touches creates another ripple, and they come back, right? And all of those intersections, all the nexus of all those little intersections are those points that will either create some little tiny bit of good or some little teeny tiny bit of bad. We're trying to pile up the good ones because we don't want the bad ones out there. Every time we throw something bad out there, it's diminishing the light. It's taking away from the light. It's taking away from the good. Okay. Why do I say that? In the ancient text, everywhere that you want to read, in the ancient text, light is used on the good side of things. You go to Star Wars. What was it? They're on the dark side of the force, right? I mean, but that's just one. There are thousands and thousands of different references to light and darkness. Let's think about that for a second. Why? Why would that be so freaking important? Okay, because light is a source. Light creates the heat, right? Darkness is not anything. Darkness is nothing. It's the void. It's the absence of light. It's absence of the source. If you walk into the shade, yes, it gets cooler, but only because we've blocked the light, the source, right? So we want to keep adding to the light, make things brighter, make everybody's lights lighter. That reduces the amount of evil. The minute we start letting the darkness come, for whatever reason, whatever that happens to be, and I write in the book that we've got the best example of that in the decade that was the 1930s to the mid 1940s of Nazi Germany. That was a moment in time where you can't get a better example of the darkness was winning. Basically, it took a dozen different nations and millions of people died, and millions of people fought to stop that darkness.
So this is so interesting, Mike, because the conversation around light and darkness, and we have a Facebook comment / question that I'd like to share. So, because I think you're asking, you're creating such a wide spectrum of conversation from your spiritual and religious past to all your current research. So a Facebook user says, I've been listening for 5 minutes. I'm trying to get caught up. Is he an atheist? So how would you answer that? Because I'm not actually sure how you would answer that yourself. So I'll let you answer that.
If we can, reach back out to him and ask him what that means exactly, atheist.
Good question.
Okay, because atheist, does that mean, am I a Christian? Okay. Here's what I'll say to that. I was a Christian back in the day. I was baptized a Catholic. Okay. And my research has brought me back to believe Christianity is the best of the religions. Okay. Am I an atheist? I believe in God. Now, well, I may not say God in particular. There's lots of names for the spirit, universal consciousness. We can call him God if you want, or her. It doesn't have a sex,
Right.
doesn't have a moment in time.
Right.
It doesn't have any kind of physical existence. It's beyond our reasoning or understanding of anything that is what we even can begin to conceive. Right? Because we're locked in this physical linear universe of moving down a track, a path. Okay. And maybe that's what the spirit, the universal consciousness, needed or wanted or had some desire to exist in for some moment in time. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know that answer. But so am I an atheist? No. I believe in God in the truest sense, that I understand that there is a creator, that creator created a universe that spawned a planet, or a solar system that spawned a planet that was a perfect designed planet that would house life, that came onto the planet shortly after it was created, and then went through iterations and iterations and iterations of changes to get us to a bipedal organism that had a gigantic brain with a sudden burst of awareness. Interesting point I bring up in my book. Okay. We had in children, we call it the aha moment, or, they where they begin to understand that, peekaboo, right? You play peekaboo. They have an understanding of the reality of things. Okay. The thing normally up to about 6 months, you cover their face, everything's gone. There's no reality. There's no truth. Right. But about 6 months, they begin to understand, well, wait, you cover it. Still there. Woo! Peekaboo. Right. And it's a big deal. Everybody laughs, and, it's a big fun. Right. It's a lot of fun. I believe humans did the same thing. I believe Homo sapiens had the same moment. I talk about it in my book. They became spiritually aware, or God. They had a God moment, right? How do I know that? Why do I say that? I say that because there's a point in history where humans everywhere on the planet began burying their dead.
Interesting. Boy, that's so fascinating.
Okay.
We have so much to talk about here, Mike. We're going to have you back sometime. So, but just a couple of things here. So I love what we're talking about today, because this is such a forum, and I'm just reminding our viewers as well. This is a forum to share where we have found, each as individuals, where we have been spirit-led through our own journey to find the truth for us. Now, not everyone believes that. A lot of people believe there is one only truth. That's why we have hundreds, if not thousands, of denominations and religions, and people fighting between each other over what is true and what the Bible means. And I was, as viewers know, I was raised in an extreme right-wing religious cult. So I understand this. I used to preach this. I used to go door to door with this. However, I have a more spiritual, happy, and joyful life now than I've ever had before, going on my own journey, having that conversation with the divine daily, connecting to historic roots, whether that's Native Americans, whether that's Christianity, whether that's, Hinduism, whether that all of those things that have contributed, like you said at the very beginning of this show and your book, in every major religion around the world. To recap, the golden rule is the same and can be found in all their sacred texts.
Can I add a little something to that? Okay. So in my research, I discovered these 5 or 6 people and those texts. The further into that I went. So back to Joseph Campbell again, every single place on the planet where writing becomes a tool. So it's being used to record things and whatever, right? Everywhere on the planet where writing becomes a tool, you will find the golden rule. Every single culture on the planet at about 500 BC is talking about the golden rule.
I love that. I love that. And I want to also add to what you said. for all of our viewers, sometimes for some viewers, they are brought up in a certain religious context and they do continue their own spiritual exploration, and that remains the perfect fit for them. So just because some people expand and search for spirituality beyond what they grew up with, we're not suggesting that everyone needs to do that. What we're saying is, at least I would, for myself, I am encouraging my viewers to just explore for yourself and look for that truth that as it resonates for you. It might resonate within the religion you grew up with. It may not resonate within religion at all. For me, the search is more important than the context. Any context, I believe, and which is what I think Mike brought us to in the quotation, and that is, in the world, there are many different roads, but the destination is the same.
Always the same.
There are
That's so
hundred
beautiful.
deliberations, but
And
the
I'm going to
result
share.
is one.
Thank you, Roger. And I'm going to share, because we have to close right away. We went a little over, and it's been one wonderful conversation. And Heather commented in to say thanks. It's a good quote. It makes me feel better to think about my mistakes, the mistakes I've made, if any, that my destiny was to be here and now, no matter how I got here, which is beautiful. And I'm really grateful that that was Heather's takeaway. And reminding everyone that this show, I'm Spiritual, but is for religious, not religious. It's a conversation about finding your own individual relationship with the divine. And if you're in a religious experience in your life right now and an organization that's working for you, that's amazing. How can you intensify it? How can we find the common thread of heart amongst humans and focus on what we have in common through love and peace, as opposed to what divides us? We have to wrap it up. I want to thank you so much, Mike, for being here. It's been an absolute delight. I hope we can have you back at some time. For all of you, thank you for joining us today. Please like and subscribe. You can send us your questions and comments on our website at imspiritualbut.com. And we'll be here again live next week at 12 Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on Wednesdays. Thank you so much, and wishing you a joyful day. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Ann.